Video 21, Part 17b of 25, Inputs to the Estimate Activity Resources Process. The purpose of this video is to develop a WBS to present the inputs to the Estimate Activity Resources Process. The Estimate Activity Resources Process is the second process in the Project Resource Management knowledge area and is related to the Planning Process Group. Please click the like button. Subscribe to my channel and share with others. Thank you. How important is the input of Project Management Plan to the PMBOK Estimate Activity Resources Process? The input of the Project Management Plan to the Estimate Activity Resources Process is critically important and foundational. It is not just one input among many. It is the primary source of the constraints, assumptions, and context within which the resource estimation must be performed. You can't realistically estimate what resources you need, such as people, equipment, and materials, and how many without knowing the project's schedule, budget, and the quality standards you must meet. The Project Management Plan provides this crucial information. Key components of the Project Management Plan used in Estimate Activity Resources. 1. Resource Management Plan. This is the most direct component. It defines the approach for estimating, acquiring, managing, and controlling resources. It answers questions like, first, what methods will we use for estimation, such as bottom-up, analogous? Second, what are the rules for using historical data? Third, what are the units of measure for resources, such as hours, days, tons? Fourth, what are the identified resource calendars, such as team availability, shift patterns? Fifth, how will we handle team member safety, onboarding, and release? 2. Scope baseline, such as project scope statement and work breakdown structure. The project scope statement contains the product description, acceptance criteria, deliverables, and assumptions and constraints. All of this directly influences the type and quantity of resources required, just as a brick house requires different resources than a wooden house. The work breakdown structure and its dictionary provide the complete list of activities and work packages for which resources must be estimated. It is the foundational structure upon which resource estimation is built. 3. Schedule baseline. The schedule baseline defines the when. The timeline of the project directly impacts resource estimation. First, you need to know when an activity is scheduled to determine if a specific resource, like a specialized engineer or a piece of equipment, is available. Second, aggressive schedules may require more resources, such as a second shift, to be completed on time, fundamentally changing the estimate. 4. Cost baseline, budget. It defines the financial constraint. The project budget is a hard constraint on resource costs. The estimated cost of resources, such as team rates, material costs, and equipment rental, cannot exceed the available budget. This often forces trade-off decisions, such as using a less experienced but cheaper resource, or extending the schedule to reduce overtime costs. 5. Quality Management Plan. It defines how well the required quality standards and processes can significantly impact resource needs. Higher quality standards might require: first, more skilled and often more expensive personnel. Second, specialized inspection equipment. Third, additional time for testing and rework, which consumes more resource hours. 6. Risk Register. It accounts for uncertainty. The risk register identifies potential resource-related risks, such as key team member may leave, or critical equipment may break down. When estimating resources, a project manager might include contingency resources, like a backup team member, or plan for the cost of renting replacement equipment as a proactive response to these risks. How can a poor project management plan analysis harm the PMBOK estimate activity resources process? A poor analysis of the project management plan not only harms the estimate activity resources process but also corrupts it, leading to a cascade of failures downstream. Here's a breakdown of how a poor analysis of each key component of the project management plan specifically harms the resource estimation process. 1. Poor analysis of the scope baseline. The problem here is that you have incomplete or inaccurate resource lists. And this manifests itself in the following ways. First, if the work breakdown structure is incomplete, you will simply forget to estimate resources for entire work packages. For example, you might plan resources for building a website but forget the resources needed for user acceptance testing and training. Second, a poorly defined project scope statement might miss key technical requirements. You might estimate for a standard software developer when you actually need a developer with specific cybersecurity or AI skills, leading to a capability gap. 2. Poor analysis of the schedule baseline. The problem here is that you have inefficient resource loading and unrealistic availability. And this manifests itself in the following ways. First, you might estimate that one senior engineer can complete 5 consecutive tasks. However, a poor schedule analysis fails to see that these tasks are on the critical path and need to be done in parallel, requiring 5 engineers simultaneously, a resource you don't have. Second, it leads to resource overallocation and burnout, or the costly last-minute need to hire contractors. It also causes project delays when the right resources aren't available at the right time. 3. Poor analysis of the cost baseline budget. The problem here is that the estimates are financially unviable. And this manifests itself in the following ways. First, this is a classic cart before the horse scenario. The team estimates needing 10 specialists at $200 per hour, only to discover the total cost far exceeds the project's budget. Second, this forces a painful and wasteful re-estimation process, undermines stakeholder confidence, and often leads to pressure to use under-skilled, cheaper resources, which jeopardizes quality and increases risk. 4. Poor analysis of the resource management plan. The problem here is that the estimates are inconsistent and unactionable. And this manifests itself in the following ways. First, without analyzing the predefined estimation methods. One team lead might estimate in person hours, while another estimates in person days, creating a chaotic and unreliable overall project estimate. Second, ignoring the resource calendars means you might estimate work for a team that is planned to be on vacation or for equipment that is already booked on another project. The estimate looks good on paper but is impossible to execute. 5. Poor analysis of the quality management plan. The problem here is the underestimation of skill sets and effort requirements. And this manifests itself in the following ways. First, if the plan requires a 6 Sigma level of quality but you estimate resources for a basic standard, you will lack the necessary quality control inspectors, testing software, and time for rework. Second, this results in a product that fails quality checks, leading to rework, delays, and increased costs, the very things a good estimate aims to prevent. 6. Poor analysis of the risk register. The problem here is the lack of resource contingency for known uncertainties. And this manifests itself in the following ways. First, the risk register may flag a risk that a key vendor might be late with a critical component. A poor analysis fails to account for this, so no resources, such as time or people, are allocated to manage an alternative sourcing strategy. Second, when the risk materializes, The project grinds to a halt because the necessary resources to execute the contingency plan were never estimated or secured. In conclusion, the input of the project management plan to the estimate activity resources process is fundamentally constraining and guiding. It ensures that resource estimates are, first, realistic, as they are based on the actual project scope, schedule, and budget. Second, integrated, as they are consistent with all other aspects of the project plan. Third, actionable, as they are provided in a format that can be used for procurement, staffing, and cost forecasting. An inadequate project management plan analysis means you are building your resource estimates on a solid foundation. The resulting estimate is not just a slightly off number, it is a fundamentally flawed document that actively derails project execution and ensures that corrective action will be necessary later. It transforms the project from a proactive, managed effort into a reactive crisis management situation from the outset. An inadequate plan analysis doesn't just create a bad estimate. This creates a domino effect of project failures. First, unrealistic expectations if stakeholders receive a resource plan that is doomed to failure. Second, project delays, which are the most common result. Resources are not available when needed, causing sequential delays. Third, budget overruns if you are forced to pay premium rates for last-minute resources, rush deliveries, or overtime. Fourth, quality is compromised if you meet deadlines with the wrong resources, forcing the team to cut corners. Fifth, team burnout if the team is constantly struggling with resource shortages, and overall location leads to low morale and high turnover. Sixth, damaged reputation if the credibility of the project manager and the team is severely damaged. As a final message, attempting to estimate activity resources in a vacuum, without integrated information from the project management plan, would result in theoretical estimates that are inaccurate and useless for the practical execution of the project. How important is the input of project documents to the estimate activity resources process? The input of project documents is critically important to the estimate activity resources process, as they provide the foundational details about the project's work, constraints, and environment necessary to create realistic and actionable resource estimates. Why these documents are indispensable? Project documents are indispensable because they bridge the gap between the general guidance in the project management plan and the precise, actionable resource estimates the process aims to produce. First, from plan to action, the project management plan provides the how-to as the resource management plan and the what as the scope baseline. The project documents provide the specific, for which activities, and with what constraints. Second, directly shape the outputs. The data within these documents directly shapes the key outputs of the process, namely the activity resource requirements and the basis of estimates. Without detailed inputs from the activity list and attributes, these outputs would lack the necessary detail and accuracy. Third, ensure holistic planning. Considering documents like the risk register and resource calendars ensures that resource estimates are not only accurate in a vacuum but also realistic within the project's specific constraints and potential uncertainties. The key project documents used in their specific roles in the estimation process are presented now. 1. Activity list. Provides the definitive list of all schedule activities that require resources. Serves as the starting point for analysis. 2. Activity attributes. Offers detailed information for each activity, such as skills required and location, which is essential for determining the type and quantity of resources. 3. Assumption log. Tracks assumptions made about resource availability, skills, and other factors, which form the basis of the estimates. 4. Resource calendars. identifies the working days and availability of both human resources, like team members, and physical resources, like equipment. 5. Risk register. Contains risks that could impact resource selection, availability, or productivity, allowing for more robust estimates. 6. Cost estimates. Influences the choice of resources, as the cost of different resource options, such as senior versus junior staff, must align with the budget. These documents do not work in isolation. The process relies on a combination of these inputs to produce key outputs such as the resource requirements, detailing the types and quantities needed, the basis of estimates, documenting how the estimates were derived, and updates to the very documents it uses, like the activity attributes and assumption log. How can a poor project documents analysis harm the PMBOK estimate activity resources process? A poor analysis of project documents directly undermines the PMBOK estimate activity resources process, leading to a cascade of negative consequences that can jeopardize the project's success. In essence, the estimate activity resources process is built on the data contained within these documents. If that data is flawed, misunderstood, or incomplete, the resulting resource estimates will be unreliable. Here's a breakdown of how poor analysis of specific documents causes harm. 1. Activity list and attributes. First, incorrect resource types. This happens if a civil engineer is assigned to a task that requires a software engineer. Second, inaccurate quantities. This happens when the number of testers required is underestimated because the complexity of an activity was not considered. 2. Assumption log. First, unrealistic estimates. This happens if estimates are based on an estimated 8 hours of productive work per day, without considering context changes or meetings, resulting in an understaffed team. Second, failed plans. This happens when the entire resource plan collapses if an unchallenged assumption, such as a key specialist will be available, proves false. 3. Resource calendars. First, schedule delays. This happens when a work is planned for a contractor who is on vacation or for equipment that is already booked on another project, causing immediate stoppages. Second, cost overruns. This happens if overtime or expedited deliveries are required because availability was not considered. 4. Risk register. First, no contingency resources. This occurs if you fail to identify the risk of a key team member leaving and not having a replacement, causing the interruption of a critical path activity. Second, unexpected resource needs. It happens if being blindsided by a risk event that requires specialized resources you didn't account for. 5. Cost estimates. First, budget breaches. It happens when highly skilled and expensive resources are selected for a task that a junior resource could handle, blowing the budget early on. Second, quality compromise. It happens when you are forced to use a less skilled, cheaper resource to stay within budget, leading to rework and delays. In conclusion, a poor resource estimation has a domino effect across the entire project, as follows. First, unrealistic schedules due to estimated activity durations. If you don't know the right resources or their true availability, any duration estimate is a guess. This leads to missed deadlines and an unreliable project schedule. Second, inaccurate budgets due to cost estimation. Resources cost money. Flawed resource estimates directly lead to incorrect cost estimates, resulting in budget overruns or misallocated funds. Third, compromised quality. Using the wrong resources, such as an inexperienced developer, or over-allocating the right ones, leading to burnout and rushed work, almost guarantees that the output will be of low quality, requiring expensive rework. Fourth, team morale and burnout. Consistently being under-resourced creates an unsustainable workload for the team, leading to burnout, high turnover, and further exacerbating resource shortages. Fifth, increased project risk. The project becomes highly vulnerable to any disruption. A single sick day, a piece of equipment breaking, or a minor scope change can derail the entire plan because there is no resource slack or proper contingency. As a final message, the analysis of project documents is not a bureaucratic exercise. It is a critical risk mitigation activity. A poor analysis injects risk directly into the project's foundation, leading to a fragile plan that is likely to fail in terms of schedule, budget, and quality. A robust analysis, on the other hand, creates a realistic, achievable, and resilient resource plan. How important is the input of enterprise environmental factors to the estimate activity resources process? The input of enterprise environmental factors is highly important to the estimate activity resources process, serving as a foundational input that shapes how you identify and quantify the resources needed for your project. To effectively use enterprise environmental factors, integrate them into your planning activities as follows. First, during project initiation and planning, conduct a structured analysis to uncover internal and external influences. This can include reviewing project documentation, conducting stakeholder workshops, and using frameworks like a PESTLE analysis to ensure no critical factor is missed. Second, the choice of resource directly impacts activity duration and cost. For example, a highly skilled and experienced resource will likely complete a task faster than a novice, but at a higher hourly rate. Enterprise environmental factors like resource location, availability, and published estimating data provide the necessary context to make these trade-off decisions. Since these factors are outside the project team's immediate control, accounting for them early is crucial for creating realistic and achievable resource plans. We present now the common enterprise environmental factors and how they influence resource estimation. 1. Regarding internal enterprise environmental factors, first, organizational culture, structure, and governance. It influences staffing policies, approval hierarchies, and how teams are structured. Second, infrastructure, such as existing facilities and equipment, determines tools, software, and physical assets available for the project, affecting what needs to be purchased. Third, internal resource capabilities and availability, impacts activity duration and cost. The skills, experience, and number of available staff are key considerations. 2. Regarding external enterprise environmental factors, first, marketplace conditions, such as competition and supplier availability, affects the cost and availability of external materials, equipment, and contractors. Second, legal, regulatory, or government standards may dictate required certifications, safety standards, or environmental regulations that impact resource choices. Third, published commercial data and benchmarking information provides industry standard data for estimating effort, such as hours per unit of work and resource requirements. Fourth, economic conditions, such as exchange rates and inflation, influences the budget available for resources and the cost of procuring them. How can a poor enterprise environmental factors analysis harm the estimate activity resources process? A poor or incomplete analysis of enterprise environmental factors directly harms the PMBOK estimate activity resources process by creating a resource plan built on faulty assumptions, leading to significant project risks and potential failure. The core issue is that enterprise environmental factors represent the context and constraints within which the project must operate. Here's a breakdown of how a poor enterprise environmental factors analysis causes harm, categorized by the type of failure. 1. Inaccurate and unrealistic resource estimates. This is the most direct consequence. The estimates will be theoretically sound but practically impossible. The problem here is that you estimate the need for 5 developers over 3 months based on the work, but you fail to consider enterprise environmental factors, in this case, the internal resource availability. This happens because your organization is already working on 3 other high-priority projects, and only 2 developers are actually available. As a result, you will experience an immediate and severe schedule slippage. The resource plan will be useless from day 1. 2. Severe schedule delays and cost overruns. Poor enterprise environmental factors analysis directly translates into missed deadlines and blown budgets. The problem here is that you plan to use a specific piece of equipment or software, but you fail to consider, first, enterprise environmental factors, such as marketplace conditions. For example, the procurement deadline for this equipment is 6 months due to global supply chain issues, not the 2 weeks you assumed. Second, other enterprise environmental factors, such as legal, regulatory standards. For example, the imported materials you specified are being held up at customs due to new trade regulations you weren't aware of. As a result, the project grinds to a halt for months, incurring massive delay costs and potential penalty fees. 3. Compromised quality and increased rework. Using the wrong or suboptimal resources inevitably leads to quality issues. The problem here is that you assign tasks based on availability rather than capability, ignoring, first, enterprise environmental factors, such as internal resource capabilities. For example, the available staff lacks the specific certification or expertise required to perform the work to the necessary standard. Second, other enterprise environmental factors, such as infrastructure. For example, the team is forced to use outdated, slow software because the analysis didn't justify the investment in modern tools. As a result, the work is done poorly, takes longer, and requires extensive rework, further draining time and budget. 4. Inability to secure resources. Your resource plan might look perfect on paper, but you can't actually acquire the resources. The problem here is that you budget for hiring 10 contractors, but you fail to consider, first, enterprise environmental factors, such as marketplace conditions. For example, there is a severe shortage of skilled labor in your industry, and market rates are 30% higher than your budget. Second, enterprise environmental factors, such as organizational culture. For example, the company's hiring freeze prevents you from bringing on new staff, even if budget is available. As a result, you cannot staff the project. The project may be approved but is doomed before it even starts. 5. Increased project risk and stakeholder dissatisfaction. All the issues above converge to create a high-risk environment and erode stakeholder confidence. The problem here is that you present a plan that is not grounded in the organization's reality. As a result, when delays and cost overruns inevitably occur, stakeholders, including sponsors and clients, lose trust in the project manager and the team. The project's perceived value plummets as its costs rise. In conclusion, enterprise environmental factors provide the ground rules for your project. By thoroughly considering them, you create resource estimates that are not only accurate but also actionable within your specific organizational and market context. In essence, the estimate activity resources process is not just a mathematical exercise of matching tasks to resources. It is a strategic planning activity that must be deeply informed by the real-world environment. A poor enterprise environmental factors analysis severs the resource plan from reality, transforming it from a reliable management tool into a primary source of project risk. How important is the input of organizational process assets to the estimate activity resources process? Organizational process assets are critically important to the estimate activity resources process, providing the historical data, established procedures, and institutional knowledge that make resource estimates faster, more accurate, and consistent with organizational standards. To maximize the value of organizational process assets in your project, you can follow this structured approach. First, identify available assets. Before estimating, consult your organization's knowledge base, document repositories, or project management office to find relevant templates, historical data, and policies. Second, assess relevance. Not all assets will fit your project-specific context. Evaluate and select the organizational process assets that best match your project's size, complexity, and goals. Third, tailor and apply. Customize the templates and procedures to suit your project's unique needs, then incorporate them directly into your resource estimation activities. The organizational process assets work alongside enterprise environmental factors, which are external conditions such as market conditions, resource availability, and commercial databases that you must consider but cannot control. Here we will present the specific types of organizational process assets used in this process and their direct applications. 1. Processes and procedures. Policies for staffing, rental, purchase of supplies, equipment. Standardized estimation guidelines ensures estimates follow organizational rules. Provides a repeatable methodology. 2. Organizational knowledge repositories. Historical data on resource effort from past projects. Lessons learned informs estimates with actual data. Helps avoid past mistakes in resource planning. 3. Templates and software. Pre-built templates for documentation. Standardizes how resource requirements are documented. Enables swift calculations and modeling. How can an inadequate analysis of organizational process assets harm the activity resource estimation process? An inadequate analysis of organizational process assets directly harms the activity resource estimation process, leading to inaccurate, unreliable, and ultimately damaging estimates, as you can now see. 1. Inaccurate and unrealistic estimates. Failure to consider historical data is a leading cause of project failure. If you don't analyze past project data, such as the duration of a similar coding task or the amount of concrete used per square meter, you're essentially guessing. This leads to overly optimistic or pessimistic estimates, with no basis in reality. 2. Reinventing the wheel and inefficiency. Without using standardized templates and procedures for resource breakdown structures or equipment lists, the project team has to create everything from scratch. This represents a huge waste of time and effort, significantly slowing down the planning process. 3. Failure to learn from past mistakes. Ignoring lessons learned is another source of failure. Poor analysis means you're likely to repeat the same resource-related mistakes. If a previous project failed because it used underqualified suppliers or underestimated the need for specialized equipment, a new project without access to these lessons is doomed to make the same costly mistakes. 4. Inconsistent approach. Disregarding established guidelines is another source of failure. If the organization has a policy of renting versus purchasing equipment and the project ignores it, the estimate may be financially unsustainable. This leads to nonconformities, audit issues, and wasted resources. In conclusion, poor estimates created by a flawed analysis of organizational process assets spread causing serious damage to the overall health of the project. First, schedule delays. Underestimating the number of engineers or equipment needed means tasks will take longer than planned. Overestimating can lead to resource idleness and budget waste, but the main schedule risk is delay due to insufficient resources. Second, cost overruns. This is a direct result. If you underestimate the resources needed, you'll need to secure them later, often at additional cost, such as hiring last-minute contractors at a higher price or paying rush fees for equipment. Rework due to the use of unqualified resources, a lesson not learned, also inflates costs. Third, compromised quality. When the schedule is behind schedule and the budget is tight, the pressure to deliver often leads to shortcuts. An overworked team may skip testing phases or use inferior materials to stay on track, directly harming the quality of the final product. Fourth, increased risk and uncertainty. The project operates with a false sense of security. The resource plan, which should be a fundamental risk mitigation tool, is actually a source of risk itself, as it is built on an unstable foundation. The project manager is constantly putting out fires related to resource shortages or excesses. Fifth, team morale and burnout. Constantly providing the team with insufficient resources, such as people, tools, and equipment, to meet unrealistic deadlines is a recipe for low morale, high stress, and eventually burnout. Team members will feel doomed to failure. Sixth, stakeholder distrust. When a project repeatedly misses deadlines and goes over budget due to inadequate planning, stakeholders, including sponsors and clients, lose confidence in the project team and the organization's ability to deliver. As a final message, organizational process assets are organizational memory. An inadequate MBO analysis forces a project to suffer from organizational amnesia, making the same mistakes, wasting resources, and dramatically increasing the likelihood of project failure. This video is finished, but we will have in the next videos. 1. Creation of WBS for different projects using WBS Schedule Pro. 2. Examples of project plans using MS Project. And many more videos. Don't forget to give a thumbs up if you like this video and want us to continue with new topics. Subscribe to the channel. All content is free. You can also comment suggesting topics you would like to see on this channel. Thank you.